Democrats are calling it the bathroom bill 2.0 from 2016, which, caused a national outrage.
Hi, and welcome to Carolina Journal's The Debrief. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. Our whole team is here. We've got lots of big news, a lot going on in your state capital. Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation here with us, plus Brianna Kramer, CJ's legislative reporter. You've got a lot of things going on. I know it's been a busy week. And managing editor for CJ, Jeff Moore. Okay, we also have joining us this week Andrew Dunn from Longleaf Politics. Welcome, Andrew. I'm so glad to hear from you. Briefing us on his North Carolina Ultimate Politics Showdown. We do have a winner.
Well, thank you. I mean, growing up in North Carolina, college basketball is a way of life. So, brackets have been a part of my life for a long time. But just over the past couple of years, I really enjoy when media companies put together brackets on things other than sports. Some of your viewers may listen to the Ruthless Variety program. They do one every year that I love. So I knew I wanted to do something, but I wanted to do something that captured what Longleaf Politics is about. And we're all about North Carolina politics and what people love about North Carolina politics. So that's how I conceptualized a bracket that's not trying to get at who's the most powerful or who's the most popular, but what really embodies North Carolina politics.
I would think one of the toughest things would have been figuring out who to put up against whom and who to seed and how to do that. Did that take a while?
It did take a while. Basically, I kind of figured out some people or entities or concepts that I wanted to be in there. And then I used that to kind of figure out, all right, so what are the regions going to look like? And then filled it out from there.
Sure. Now, for those of you who haven't been following us for the last week or so, it's been so much fun. Andrew put together a bracket of all the different things that really make North Carolina, all from barbecue to basketball rivalries to the Republican Revolution from 2012, all of these things that have helped define how North Carolina has grown, changed, and where it comes from in state politics and really nationally, because it makes us such a unique place. What's the feedback been like for this bracket?
People have had a lot of fun with it. And it's really interesting, as North Carolina has really grown and a lot of people have come here, some of the deeper cuts, more unusual, not obvious things, people were asking me, what is this about? And that was a lot of fun to get to, help educate folks who are newer to North Carolina politics on some of the lore and background.
Yeah, absolutely. I was telling Mitch, my husband, who's born and raised in Raleigh, said, "Who's S.A. Quamvaderi?" I don't know that guy. I'm like, oh, so painful. But it gives everybody a chance to really see all these great things that make this a fantastic place to live. What do you think?
Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts, actually, was actually reading the little blurbs and having the refresher on the little points of culture and context in North Carolina. Just to have that all put together like that was very enjoyable. But I've started to wonder, I think you may plan to do this next year as well. And if you do, are you going to pick a completely new set of 64 different items? And how tedious is that going to be?
It would be a big project. I don't know if I'll do this exact thing again, but I'll have to come up with a new concept.
If we haven't already said it, the John Locke Foundation won. Did you say that?
I don't think we've mentioned
We were really excited about
that. Burying the lead.
Yeah, burying the lead a little bit. The Locke Foundation won, which was really fun for all of us and really gave context to how much has changed over the last decade in North Carolina politics. You're not from North Carolina originally, so this must have been particularly educational.
Yeah, it was definitely the mix of all of the different topics that were encompassed into all things North Carolina. It was fun to see it get narrowed down. I'm curious to know if you were surprised at the final four and the final topics that got narrowed down.
It was a little bit surprising. And the John Locke Foundation was definitely a Cinderella story, coming in as a number 11 seed and knocking off some heavy hitters like former Governor Jim Hunt and Jesse Helms, yep, and Jim Martin, all sorts of big names in that power players region. but I think it's well deserved. I mean, the final ended up being John Locke Foundation versus Esse Quam Videri, which is, the state motto, to be rather than to seem. And I really see a lot of similarities between the two, because, that's how I view the John Locke Foundation is, not flashy, not chasing clicks, but really being substantive, intellectual, and shaping politics and thought in North Carolina.
Great. Thanks so much, Andrew. I'm so glad you were able to join us this week. All right, so what do you think? Why do you think a bracket like this is so important? And so fun. I thought it was so fun.
Yeah, I'm not sure that
we won, but
yeah, exactly. I'm not sure that it's terribly important, but
Right.
it is interesting,
Yeah.
and it's a good way to gauge what people think about who is influential, who is important in North Carolina political history. I mean, those of us associated with the John Locke Foundation will think, well, of course the John Locke Foundation is important, but are we really more important than Jesse Helms and Jim Hunt or the Esse Quam Videri or college rivalries?
Sure.
Maybe not, but certainly it's interesting to see what people think about that. And it's a good way to remind people about history. I think a lot of people who went through this had to look at some of these folks and say, oh yes, this person was important. Here's why that was important. How important was he or she compared to these other things? And I think in that way it's valuable, even if the final result is something that we'll be excited about and other people might say, well, I'm not sure. But it's certainly an important thing to do every once in a while to remind people.
Yeah, of course. And that NC Paul community likes to talk about it, and really is some really good history buffs. So it is very interesting. I'm going to switch over to the state legislature. Brianna, you've been covering this all week. It's been a crazy busy week. Tell me what's going on.
Yeah, a lot is happening down at the General Assembly. Republican senators introduced an interesting bill this week called the Women's Safety and Protection Act.
Okay.
And that ruffled a lot of feathers down in the Capitol because Democrats are calling it the bathroom bill 2.0 from 2016, which, caused a national outrage over this debate of gender ideology and transgender issues. And so it had a lot of backlash back in 2016. But senators filed a similar, not quite identical bill, but really just defining biological sex, what it means to be male and female, and then restricting some private spaces for gender or sex. And so that bill is going to go forward in the Senate. And then we had Democrats kind of talking about it during a press conference, addressing it, and kind of causing
it got a lot of attention because they're saying it's HB 2.0.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's different, right? I mean, it's different, and it's a different time. We're on a different cultural trend right now.
Yeah, and that's something interesting to point out is that times have changed, and data shows that more people are now backing some restrictions on transgenders in sports, for example, or in some private spaces. So really what this would do is just restrict like bathrooms or locker rooms in public facilities like schools or prisons.
Sure.
And so it's a little different, but yeah, times have changed, I think, from 2016, and I don't think we're going to see that same level of outrage.
Right, and one of the things about HB2, I still have a little PTSD from the HB2 times, and one of the things I remember about it, it was less about the bathroom access and more about whether municipalities could set their own rules for that.
Yeah, as far as the legislation. So it had a bunch of different significant parts, and the most significant legally may have been the state supremacy in setting some of those standards for developing rules and regulations in those spaces. But with this, I'm sure that Democrats holding the press conference would very much like this to be an HB 2.0 kind of situation. But it is very telling. A lot has changed. We kind of were ahead of the curve in 2016 when this issue came up in North Carolina, and it was a precursor to these kind of social issues actually being a topic of debate politically, nationally, for the next several years. But I think that we went through that rise of those issue sets and saw its peak probably 2022. And now it's down on the other side of things. So if you look at polling, even back in 2016, people were supportive of the separation of the bathroom situations. But now I imagine that polling is even stronger. And so Democrats holding the press conference are pointing to the Trump administration and policies there that are making this kind of a dangerous environment for things like that. But that legislation seems to have kind of common sense, popular support for dividing those things. So we'll see how it goes.
What do you think?
To me, the politics are going to be the very interesting piece to watch of this. This is a bill in the Senate. The Republicans have a veto-proof majority in the Senate, so it's likely to get through there. In the House, they don't have a veto-proof majority, but there could be some Democrats who were elected in culturally conservative areas that might feel, oh, you know, people in my district would want me to vote for this.
Right.
Josh Stein, if this got to his desk, would almost certainly veto it. And so this really could put some pressure, if the bill gets through the House, could put some pressure on some Democrats in districts that can go to Republicans to say, do I stick with the party, or do I go with what my constituents want? So it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out as the bill moves forward.
Sure. Make sure you comment below. We want to hear what you think about this. There'll be a link right there below to the bill itself. I always think it's important to read the bill, not just your local news coverage of it, and certainly check out Carolina Journal, but read the bill yourself, get a sense of what it really means, and let us know what you think. What else is going on?
Yeah, another piece of news happening at the General Assembly this week is Senate Majority Leader Paul Newton has announced that he is resigning. He is retiring from the General Assembly, and that actually took effect on Wednesday. It was announced on Tuesday, so a very last-minute public announcement.
Sure.
And reports have been circulating that he is going to be filling a general counsel position at UNC Chapel Hill.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so he's going to be out of the Senate, which is a big deal because he's one of the top leaders in the Senate.
Right.
And he's actually just this month been pushing forward an energy bill that we've been tracking. So, you know, Berger is on that one too. So that should be still going forward, but just interesting that kind of last minute he is stepping down from his position.
Yeah, of course. And another bill that I've been watching, and let me know what y'all think. Democrats filed a bill this week that would give in-state tuition for illegal immigrants. And I think that's an interesting, I don't know if that's a, you know, maybe they're seeing something or they just want to get the point out there to spark the discussion. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, this kind of invites some controversy, obviously, with filing these bills. When you're in the legislative minority, then you don't have a lot of chance to use the real leverage to get things across the finish line. So you tend to see bills that are filed that are somewhat of a wish list of things that you might have.
Right.
If at the very least, just to satisfy your constituency, the people that voted for you, that you're actually trying to push for some of the kind of policies that you campaigned on. So this seems akin to something like that. I think there are some other bills filed this week that definitely fit that definition.
Yeah, there's another one the Democrats filed that would raise the minimum wage in North Carolina to over $22 an hour, I believe. So, you know, some of these very far-stretched bills that are being filed kind of last minute here as the filing deadlines approach for the House and Senate.
Right.
And so some of these aren't really going to go anywhere, but they just make some headlines and get people talking about some Democrat priorities as well.
Very interesting.
And this shouldn't surprise anyone because Republicans did the same thing when they were in the minority. You have issues that are important to you. You file the bills to put those issues forward. And if the majority party goes along, then you can get some action. If they say no, then you just say, well, this is what we would do if we were in charge. And that's what the Democrats are doing. They've been out of power now for quite a bit longer than they expected, and probably even longer than some of the Republicans expected. So basically, their only opportunity to do anything major on legislation is file a bill for their priorities, stake out their positions, and say, hey, voters, if you vote for us, we would do these things. Now, whether that's good for their cause or not remains to be seen, but that's what they're doing. I think the other bill that probably needs to be mentioned, just because this has been a long-standing fight in the General Assembly, is a bill in the Senate on the school calendar. Remember that for years, the House has been saying, let's have more flexibility on school calendars, and the Senate has said, no, we're going to help the tourism industry by saying you can't start before the end of summer and you have to end by the beginning of summer, and you have very little flexibility. Now the Senate is going for a little bit more flexibility, saying that schools could go with one or another of a couple of different options of calendars. One would be a little bit earlier start. It would also have to have a little bit earlier finish. And then the other option would be the later start and then the finish that has been talked about in the past. So seeing a little bit of flexibility from the Senate on that issue shows that perhaps some of their constituents have been talking to him and have gotten to him on this issue.
Right. Any thoughts on that one? There's some teeth in this one, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And it's, I've been tracking several other bills as well from the Senate side. And on Thursday, they also passed the healthcare bill. So they're pushing forward healthcare initiatives to lower the costs here in North Carolina. And then on the House side, they've pushed forward some other bills that are now waiting Senate action as well. One interesting bill dealing with lab-grown meat and restricting the labeling on that. So that's now awaiting consideration from the Senate side.
Wow.
Watching
those
several
carefully.
bills we're watching
good.
right now. And then a different thing that just came up this week is South Carolina pushing forward some efforts to be competitive with North Carolina when it comes to income taxes. So that's something interesting for our economy.
Sure,
and what we could see come out of the budget in the next couple months.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're lowering taxes to put a little pressure on North Carolina.
Yeah, they're going to match North Carolina's income tax rate by 2026.
Wow.
And so it's I believe a
lot.
40% drop in their income
That's
tax rate in
huge.
South Carolina. So that's huge for South Carolinians. Yeah.
Absolutely. You're tracking a few too.
Yeah, so we've got some healthcare related bills that are moving. We've got one filed in companion bills in the Senate and the House to completely repeal the certificate of need law regime. This would repeal everything. This is what regulates and restricts permissions to expand hospitals, add beds, purchase expensive equipment, surgery centers, things like that. So now there's a regime that you have to ask for a permission slip to do that.
Yeah.
They're very hard to get from the government, and your competitors kind of get to have a say in whether or not you get it.
Right.
So John Locke Foundation has been opposed to certificate of need policies for a long time, and there have been multiple efforts to repeal them over the years. There have been lawsuits. There's one going on right now that's still alive. But this, there's been kind of adjustments, small adjustments to the law over the years. There's some proposals out there to make some further small adjustments to it, but this is just a wholesale repeal. Senator Benton Sawry is a sponsor of this bill. He said he wants to just let the market make decisions, and the state doesn't need to be the gatekeeper.
Sure.
Because it only adds costs that then get passed down to the patient. And we know that North Carolina in particular is actually a very high cost healthcare environment. And healthcare overall across the nation is such a high cost consideration for people, especially as they get older. So that's a very consequential bill. We'll see if it actually has consequence down on Jones Street to see if it actually moves. And then we also have a medical parental Bill of Rights legislation. So apparently, there are some policies at different medical practices and in some school systems when they're seeing the nurses that if a child is above 12 years old, they ask the child if they are allowed to share that information with the parents. And so they could be having conversations about mental health, substance abuse, COVID-19 vaccinations, things like that. All sorts of like kind of sexual maturity conversations going on with the doctors. And so we've got
school nurse,
or the school nurse, and things like that. All sorts of things that, as a parent, you would definitely want to know if that's going on with your child. But it's kind of backwards in that it's asking the child to sign a release to allow the parents to do it, to access medical records. There was a situation,
So a 7th grader could give permission to access their medical records over their parent?
Yeah. So if they said no, then that parent may not have access to some of the medical records. So there was a situation that one of the lawmakers had a constituent where their child was in the hospital, and they had to fight with the hospital, or their child had to sign a release to say that the parent could get some of the medical information of whatever conversation they had when they first were admitted and got all of that. So it seemed a little bit backwards, especially. I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't been tackled already over the last couple of years that we've been talking about a lot of these issues. So, but this bill, House Bill 519, would kind of make parental consent kind of a mandatory item for those mental health, substance abuse conversations. They mentioned the COVID-19 vaccination Supreme Court case, or the ruling on that case, actually, to allow that to go forward. And then really impressed upon everybody the access to the medical records. So that's something that they need.
That's frightening.
And so this take up to the federal age of responsibility, I think, which is just listed as 18 years old. So if the policies at a medical practice weren't there already, this would become a law if this were to pass. And so you would have to get that parental consent and share all that information with the parents up until 18 years old.
Wow. Let us know what you think about this, because this is something we've been talking a lot about, especially since COVID. Comment below and tell us what you think. Should kids be able to give consent or deny access for their parents to their medical records when it comes down to a conversation with a school nurse or checking into the emergency room? We want to know what you think, so make sure you let us know. And he mentioned this lawsuit about a teen that was vaccinated against their parents' wishes. Tell me more about what's happening with that.
Yes, so Jeff mentioned that there was a state Supreme Court ruling in this case, one of the major rulings that came out late last week after the debrief.
Right.
State Supreme Court 5-2 said that a lawsuit filed by a then 14-year-old and his mother against the Guilford County Schools and the Old North State Medical Society could go forward.
Okay.
Lower courts have ruled against them. And what the lower court said was that there is a federal law called the PrEP Act that immunized the school system and the medical society from legal action because they were involved in providing the COVID vaccine. And so because there was a medical emergency, that the federal government was able to invoke the powers of the PrEP Act, and that anyone involved in the vaccine administration would be free from legal action. So lower courts have said, well, that's what the federal law says. You can't sue, even though what happened in this case was the kid goes to get a COVID test. They tell him, we're going to get a vaccine. He says, no, I don't want one. They don't talk to his parents. And one of the clinic workers says, well, just give it to him anyway. They gave him the vaccine. And the Court of Appeals, in throwing out the case, said it was egregious conduct.
Right.
But they couldn't allow him to move forward. The Supreme Court reversed that. So the 5 Republicans on the court were in the majority. They said, no, there's a right to bodily integrity that you have. You can't be forced to take something against your will. There's also the right for the parent to control the upbringing of the child, which is also in play here. So the case can go forward. The 2 Democratic justices dissented, but that case now goes back to the State Court of Appeals to deal with these issues. Another case that was of interest that we'll mention briefly for basketball fans, we're in the middle of March Madness. There's a lawsuit that was filed last year by 12 members of the 1983 NC State Men's Basketball Championship team.
1983.
The Cardiac Pack. Remember, Jim Valvano led that team, surprise winners of the championship. They sued the NCAA, saying that the NCAA has for decades been illegally making money off their name, image, and likeness because they're in all these promos for all these Cinderella teams that win the championship. And so the development that happened this week is that a state business court judge, Mark Davis, who actually happens to be a Carolina guy, he went to UNC for both undergrad and law school, but he ruled against the NCAA, which wanted to have this case put aside until a federal lawsuit in New York is resolved. And Judge Davis said, no, there's no reason to do that. I'm looking at all the reasons that you would set aside this case, and none of them come into play here. This case can go forward in North Carolina courts, and the North Carolina courts should be very interested in the outcome of this case because most of the people involved live in North Carolina. It was a North Carolina team. They were representing a North Carolina university. So this case is going to go forward. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Absolutely. Should the 1983 Cardiac Pack own their name, image, and likeness? Now, it wasn't around then, right? And they're in all these promos. That's really an interesting question. Let us know what you think. Thanks so much for tuning in to The Debrief. We'll be right back here next week. Did you learn something? Make sure you subscribe to Carolina Journal's YouTube channel and watch The Debrief every week, where we're going to be breaking down everything happening in your state government. And check out carolinajournal.com for the latest breaking news.